do-re-mi.
Because Woody was an underdog himself, he began to identify with other people who were poor and repressed.
The Depression had destroyed farmers' livelihoods, and now the Dust Bowl destroyed their land. A great movement started out to California, where there were migrant farm worker jobs. Woody joined the drift west. This is when he wrote his first song.
So long, it's been good to know you. So long, been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is a-blowing me home. I've got to be rolling along.
They stopped you at the California border and said, do you have any money? And he went, wait a second, isn't this America? I didn't realize I needed a visa to go across the California border. Once he started saying, I wonder why it's like this, the feelings started planting ideas in his head, which started coming out as words and language of his music.
It's so long, it's been good to know you.
When I was in high school, and I listened to So Long It's Been Good to Know You, and I thought, my God, this guy can't sing at all. He's a terrible singer. But I love his songs. It took me a while to learn to like music with the bark still on it.
And the rustlers broke on us in the dead hours of night. She rose from her warm bed, a battle.
He knew how to put words together and make it be meaningful and poetic. A rich collection of slang words that came from oil well drilling and gamblers that they sing about in the blues and in the cowboy songs.
And fight for your land.
It's not the way they speak in New York City.
Come all of you cowboys, and don't ever run. As long as there's bullets in both of your guns.
Woody's songs fitted the mood of the times.
I am prepared to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require.
When Franklin Roosevelt became president, he immediately implemented the New Deal to create work despite the Depression, and folk music was expected to spread the word.
In the 1920s, folk music had been built around a nostalgia for a pastoral, rural world. By the 1930s, that phrase folk music gains a different sort of electricity about it, and it's hijacked, I suppose, by the left.
At first, the left had dreamed of modern classical music as the path to a bright future. Pete Seeger was from a well-off New York family. Both his parents were classical musicians who wanted to take music to the people.
My father was in a group called the Composers Collective. After all, in Russia they had collective farms. Why not have a composers collective in New York? But the proletariat was not interested in their songs. My father brought a Kentucky miner's wife to the meeting of the collective, and she sang, I am a union woman, just brave as I can be. I do not like the bosses, and the bosses don't like me.
When my husband works in the coal mine, he loads a car on every trip.
The other composer said, Charlie, this is the music of the past. We're supposed to be creating the music of the future. And my father said to her, I'm sorry they didn't understand you, but I know some young people are going to want to learn your songs, and I was one of them.
In the 30s, the Communist Party was as mainstream in America as it would ever be. It abandoned modernism and threw in its lot with folk music. But the two heroes were not yet quite ready to man the barricades.
When you get started, it's hard to stop. If you don't look out, you're gonna blow your stop when you do the okey-dokey.
Guthrie now had a job playing for his cousin Jack on a Los Angeles country radio show. Many of the southern white recording artists of the 20s had died or gone back into obscurity. Others were swept into this emerging commercial country scene. Folk was already becoming folksy. Country music lent to the right. But Guthrie was different. He had a sideline writing a column for a communist paper.
The best instrument that he played was the typewriter. He would play a lot of fundraising parties, and communists were his best audience, his only paying audience an awful lot of the time.
Communism, he called it. It's communism, what we have in common. One guy told me he couldn't possibly be communism, he could never finish the paperwork. 3 nights a week meetings, this is not Woody. There's no way.
But it was enough to lose him his job at the country radio station. Meanwhile, Leadbelly was struggling too, trying to make a comeback without John Lomax.
He wanted to be a commercial singer, but his style was passé.
Its rough rawness appealed mainly to the left. The general public, especially the black public, preferred a more uptown sound they could dance to. Josh White had been the youngest star of the race records era. He didn't want to be danced to, he wanted people to listen. He found a home in the emerging folk scene in New York.
Wet your way till that blood red river run from my back window to the rising sun.
His style was smooth, but his past was brutal. Born in the South, he'd seen his father badly beaten and put in an insane asylum for daring to ask a white sheriff to remove his hat in their house. From the age of 8, he traveled around leading blind black musicians, 66 of them in all.
Red River, Red River.
One of the blind men he was leading were sleeping in a field. And the blind man heard some noise and woke my old man up. And he woke my old man up by putting his hand over his mouth so my father wouldn't make any noise. A crowd of white people had found 2 black men, chased them, and hanged them.
What your way?
These men were already dead, hanging from the trees.
From my back window to the rising sun.
And every now and then, someone would get a hot poker and go and burn these bodies. This is what this 8-year-old boy witnessed.
Age 17, he'd go north for good, leaving all the blind bluesmen he'd worked for behind. John Lomax's son Alan was put in charge of the folk song archive at the Library of Congress in Washington.
He did in 6 years what most men would have done in a lifetime. He was full of youthful confidence and energy. He'd call up the head of the Columbia Broadcasting System. Mr. Paley, I think you should play some of these wonderful melodies.
Hello there, Peter. Oh, howdy. What's that funny-looking guitar you're playing?
Oh, this isn't a guitar. This is a banjo.
Well, tell me, is a banjo something new?
New? About as new as America is. You see,
Alan gave Pete Seeger his first job, sifting through the southern records of the 20s to decide which ones could best be considered folk.
The banjo still makes folks dance out in the country.
Well then, Pete, what are you doing here in New York City?
Well, it's a funny thing, but people in this big town are beginning to like my kind of music, too.
Pete was from the big town himself, but he saw hope for the future in looking back to the music of the rural poor.
Pete ended up taking a stand as a political songwriter. That's what he decided to do, but I think it comes from, the folk traditions were really important to him as well. And as time went on, the people that were actually carrying the tradition on just happened to be really political people.
Alan Lomax had swung increasingly to the left, much to his father's annoyance. But even more wounding to his father was that he'd taken up with Leadbelly again. Allen put Leadbelly on his new radio show and recorded him again for the Library of Congress.